explorations, the exam, I'm going to look at comparing text in this exam. I think before we do anything, let's look at the learning outcomes of this course, because basically this is what you're being assessed on in this exam. So you've got to show in the exam that you have read a number of books in the literary canon, and you've confronted cultural diversity that's informed and continues to inform English literature. So you've got to show a range of texts. So the more of a range you can show, the better, in a way. Bear that in mind in your answers. You've understood literary genres, so that's going to be crucial. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. And how forms yield experimentation. So the form of the epic poem perhaps has been experimented by a poet like Ovid in Metamorphoses in a way in which is quite different from the Odyssey. That's one form of experimentation. We'll look a little bit more about this later. Recognize the historicity as well as continued accessibility of text. So you've got to be able to put a text in its historical context, give a sense of what background is the text coming from. You need to have an overview of the literature in the course. More of that in a minute. There's some excellent reading you can do on this by study of primary text, so that's the actual text you had to read, and more specialised texts. I'll come back to that. Critical analysis is crucial here. And then this final one, which I'm going to look at a bit more later on, be able to reflect on exploration of and within text. Can I just really emphasize that for you? That's important. Right, this is your assessment criteria. Now, this is different from the sorts of things one gets in A-level, where there are very detailed marking schemes. The people marking this exam are given a set of criteria to mark by, but they're looking really at this. So if you show that you understand how texts have become culturally significant, that's important. You've got to be able to compare concepts that are handled in text from different periods and cultural backgrounds. Responsiveness to genre, the type of text that's being revealed is important, and sensitivity to historical context. More of that in a few minutes. And evolutions exemplified by the text, so the ways in which these texts have changed. You've got to perform basic textual analysis, but obviously in the exam, as opposed to your essays, you're not expected to have great chunks of quotation remembered that you then sort of analyse in detail that perhaps possibly you did in your essays. An awareness of exploration as a literary device. We're going to come back to that because I think this is the key to doing well with your revision. This wider reading that's on the reading list is so useful. Go to the library, particularly look at English literature in context. It's very useful for getting a sense of background to this and an overview. All of these texts, looking up these texts in the these reputable sources is far better than wasting your time on Wikipedia. So bear this in mind, please. Right, comparing texts. Firstly, you should be able to discuss any two works on the exploration course which are not what you've discussed in the other bit of the exam. Right, I have gone through the different exam questions that have been given to you on the VLE and just group them to hopefully help you think about how you might revise from them. Right, there are first type of question we're going to look at are the questions which ask you to explore the concept of explorations, the explorations that readers and writers make. So this is worth kind of getting some notes on and doing some work and thought on this yourself. I'm just going to pick out 2 or 3 questions to look at, but obviously I think it's really worth your while sort of going through all of these questions and jotting down possible answers. Let's look at the first one. Compare 2 core texts for the ways in which they affront readers' expectations of form. I have put this in as a sort of exploration question. Actually, I think this question is very much about exploring the way in which readers' expectations are changed and affronted. They're challenged in various texts. So you may, for a question like this, you may want to look at a so-called traditional text, a classic text, such as the Odyssey, which actually looks like it is a epic poem in a fairly straightforward chronological fashion. So in other words, it takes us from the beginning of the story and takes us right through to the end. And actually, you look carefully at that, the form of the poem is quite surprising. There are moments in the book, in the poem, when we actually have a great deal of narration from various different characters that actually go back in time. And so, even a classic text like the Odyssey is challenging them from that point of view. And if you're doing the Odyssey, look for that. Do that in your notes. It's certainly something that was covered in the lectures, and it's certainly elsewhere in all of the source material you've got. And then you might want to pick a much more sort of challenging text in terms of form, such as the Hearing Trumpet, for example. Very surprising to compare it perhaps to the Odyssey, but the Hearing Trumpet is a novel, and yet it's quite unlike any sort of novel most of us have read. It seems to dispense with much of the traditional kind of characteristics of a novel. We've got a very detailed sort of story within that about the abbess, which hardly seems to have any sort of sensible place within the form of the narrative, and yet it's there. Why is it there? It is affronting us, isn't it? And so it's worth thinking about the ways in which we are taken, we're forced to sort of explore the form of a text by the way in which it challenges us. Okay, so think about that question. I think that's a good one to revise from. The next question I thought was quite good as well. On what basis would any two texts on this course appear to deserve or not deserve canonical status? I mean, I really think this is worth revising. Think about these texts in terms of their place in the literary canon. Obviously, there are certain texts that are very much at the heart of the literary canon, such as Hamlet and Paradise Lost. Why are they? It might be worth thinking about that from your perspective. What is it about them that makes them such iconic and important texts that seem to be so influential in our culture still? And then finally we get to here, in a moment I'm going to move on to the next page, but we get on to a more exploratory question. Some works are more exploratory than others. Contrast two course texts, one of which qualifies as exploratory and one much less so. Cannot emphasize enough the usefulness of making notes on this issue of explorations. It's in the assessment criteria, it's in your learning outcomes. Getting a few pages of notes about the ways in which these texts are explorations of issues, explorations of concepts, explorations of form, explorations of genre is important. And then perhaps even literal explorations. We have the whole concept of the journey is very important in many of these texts. This next question we've got there is another sort of what I'd call a reader response one, similar to the first question I looked at, about the way in which we respond as readers. More questions here that are about explorations. and the ways in which, you know, we as readers are forced to explore issues, and the ways in which the writers explore issues. You know, even this question I wanted to point out: define transgression and compare any two texts in which it plays a key part. Now you'd think, well, it isn't obviously a sort of explorations question, but it is if you think about it, isn't it? Define transgression, the ways in which crossing boundaries, to transgress, trans from the Latin mean across, and gress to go. So we are going across boundaries with transgression. We are breaking rules. We are doing something wrong, aren't we? And you might want to look at the ways in which characters transgress in a particular text, but you might want to think about the way in which a text transgresses the rules of the genre. It perhaps breaks certain rules that we know were important in the culture of the time, and perhaps breaks rules for us now, challenges us now. So, you know, I'm thinking here about Antigone. Very good text to look at the whole issue of transgression, in many different ways, the ways in which it conforms and transgresses to the kind of genre of the epic tragedy. It both is an epic tragedy and isn't in certain ways. Think about that, get some notes on that. And then we have, of course, the character of Antigone, who is transgressive, and Creon as well. I put also another question I'd just like to explore is discuss dysfunctional families in any two course texts. Again, not a natural sort of explorations type question, but I think it's very much inviting you to sort of explore what a dysfunctional family is in this text. And then I've grouped some other questions that are very much about a theme or concept, and then I've got a set of questions here that are really very much about the manipulation of genre. We've already looked at this a bit, but I think it's really worthwhile looking at the ways in which genre is important in the text you've looked at. Look at this last question: analyze two works on this course to explore the proposition that the genres leak. Again, we've got this issue of exploration, which is important, but we've also got the idea of genres not quite conforming to the rules that you'd expect them to. And so think about that. You might want to look at the more sort of modern texts, and the ways in which perhaps certain genres of the domestic novel, for example, domestic family drama, have both influenced perhaps To the Lighthouse, a very experimental novel, and have and also how Virginia Woolf has sort of battled against the conventions of that genre, haven't they? And she's also sort of merged it with the whole genre of the philosophical novel and the experimental novel. So she's done something quite kind of interesting. These genres have been leaking together, haven't they, to produce something that's completely unique. So I've just put a little chart here together. I think this is quite useful as 4 concepts perhaps to get your notes together on. Readers' explorations, so, you know, thinking about your own reader response to various issues, and then feminine explorations. I think this is really important, particularly with the text later on, but even, you know, Antigone. We see a repeated theme of the ways in which women explore their sexualities, for example. They explore their identities, they explore the world of men in many of the texts we've looked at. And we've got then the very obvious kind of exploration of the physical journey, which comes up again and again, and I think it's worth thinking about how does the concept of the journey function in text as a way of creating narrative tension technique, which illustrates a mental journey, a journey of discovery. And then finally, something I've already mentioned, the whole concept of genre. How does a text conform to the rules of a genre? How does it actually adhere to certain rules and regulations, perhaps, that genres establish, and subvert them? It actually does something a bit different, because all of these texts have elements of genre. Fiction at times, they have the earlier texts have elements of the kind of genre of particularly of tragedy and the epic, but they also do something quite different at various points from what you would expect. And it's worth kind of getting your notes together on the ways in which one's expectations of a text are constantly being subverted. Thank you.